John sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly into space. His mind was spinning, trying to process the words he had just heard. "I need to sleep with another man to feel alive," said Emily, his wife of more than a decade. Her confession sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the room. John's heart was beating wildly, a mixture of shock and anger burning in his chest. Emily, the woman he loved and trusted, was now revealed to be a traitor. The nights of conversation, the plans for the future, everything seemed like a big lie. John knew something had changed in her over the last few months, but he never imagined such a brutal revelation. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to control the storm of emotions. John's mind began to plot. If Emily wanted to feel alive, he would also find a way to rekindle his own flame, a flame fueled by revenge. The next few weeks would be a dangerous dance of secrets and retribution, where every move would be crucial. And he was determined to not only survive, but to destroy those who tried to take everything from him. New York was a city of contrasts, where the dreams of many intersected on the busy avenues and in the skyscrapers that touched the sky. John Carter was a successful businessman known for his tenacity and strategic vision. Owner of an investment company, he had built a financial empire that guaranteed him a life of luxury and comfort. But, despite all his professional success, his personal life was far from being a bed of roses. Emily, his wife, was an elegant and charismatic woman. Graduated in arts, she dedicated her time to cultural projects and social events. The two met in college and, since then, they formed a couple that many envied. Appearances, however, can be deceiving. Over the past few months, John felt like something was different. Emily seemed distant, often deep in thought, and her conversations became superficial and distant. The luxurious apartment where they lived, located in one of the most sophisticated neighborhoods in Manhattan, was a masterpiece of modern design. The panoramic windows offered a stunning view of the city, but even that magnificent view could not alleviate the growing tension between the couple. John spent long hours at the office, immersed in reports and meetings, while Emily became increasingly involved in social events, apparently searching for something he couldn't identify. One night, after another exhausting day of work, John came home and found Emily sitting on the couch, lost in a book. He tried to start a conversation, but she seemed absent, like her mind was miles away. The feeling of disconnection was palpable, and John didn't know how to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. Emily, in turn, felt suffocated by routine and the expectation of perfection. The marriage that was once a fairy tale now seemed like a golden prison. She longed for something more, something that would bring back the passion and excitement she once felt. The parties and events she attended were an attempt to escape the monotony, but nothing seemed to fill the void that grew inside her. It was at one of these events that Emily met David, a charming, mysterious man who quickly caught her interest. David was everything John wasn't: unpredictable, exciting, and full of surprises. The attraction between them was instantaneous, and Emily found herself increasingly involved in a dangerous game of seduction and desire. She knew she was playing with fire, but the feeling of experiencing something forbidden was irresistible. Meanwhile, John began to notice small changes in Emily's behavior. She dressed up more, went out more often, and always seemed to be texting on her cell phone. He tried to confront her, but Emily always had an excuse ready, a convincing explanation. John, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He determined to discover the truth. He hired a private investigator to follow Emily's footsteps and collect information about her activities. The reports she received confirmed her suspicions: Emily was having an affair with David. The initial shock gave way to cold, calculated anger. John knew he couldn't confront Emily directly. He needed a plan to unmask her and, at the same time, get revenge on everyone involved. John began to observe Emily more closely, noticing every detail, every lie, every slip-up. He knew he needed to be patient, wait for the right moment to act. The pain of betrayal was transformed into relentless determination. He would use his intelligence and resources to turn the tide in his favor. Meanwhile, Emily continued to meet with David, increasingly entangled in a web of lies and secrets. She had no idea that John was aware of everything and that his revenge was just beginning. John began manipulating situations at work to be more present at home, observing and collecting more information without Emily noticing. The atmosphere in the apartment became increasingly tense. The conversations were brief and full of implications. John used his coolness and emotional control to avoid arousing suspicion, maintaining the appearance of a devoted husband while plotting his silent revenge. He began to discreetly involve some trusted allies in his plan, ensuring that each step was meticulously calculated. John knew that to destroy Emily and David, he needed to undermine their trust and relationship from the inside out. It began to plant seeds of doubt in Emily's mind, making her question David's true intentions. He used privileged information to manipulate situations in his favor, always one step ahead. The tension between John and Emily reached its peak at a dinner with friends. Beneath the surface of smiles and pleasant conversations, John dropped hints that only Emily would understand, observing with satisfaction the discomfort and uncertainty that appeared on her face. He knew that the psychological warfare was just beginning and that his every move would bring her closer to despair. John's revenge plot unfolded with surgical precision, and he was determined not to stop until Emily and David paid for their betrayal. The road to retribution would be long and tortuous, but John was prepared to follow it to the end, without looking back. Their lives would never be the same, and John was willing to do anything to ensure his revenge was complete. The weeks that followed were a game of psychological chess between John and Emily. John maintained the facade of a devoted husband while plotting his every move with precision. His revenge plan began to take shape when he decided to get closer to David. Pretending to be unaware of the betrayal, John invited David to dinner at his home, a perfect opportunity to begin his strategy. Dinner was a sophisticated affair, filled with fake smiles and superficial conversations. John watched each interaction between Emily and David, noticing the hidden tension in the glances exchanged. Throughout the night, he lobbed seemingly harmless questions, but carefully calculated to plant doubts in David's mind about Emily's loyalty. David, in turn, began to feel uncomfortable with John's presence, feeling that something wasn't right, but unable to identify exactly what it was. Meanwhile, Emily tried to remain calm, but her nervousness was evident. John's every word seemed loaded with hidden meaning, and she began to wonder if he knew more than he let on. The tension in the air was palpable, and John reveled in the growing paranoia he managed to instill in the two lovers. To further strengthen his plan, John began to manipulate David's work environment. Using contacts and influence, he created unforeseen problems and challenges that placed David under constant pressure. David's performance at work began to decline, and he found himself increasingly overwhelmed and insecure. John knew that a man under pressure is more susceptible to making mistakes, and he was prepared to capitalize on every one of them. John also began to approach Emily's colleagues and close friends, creating situations where he could sow doubts about David's fidelity. Little comments, worried looks, and seemingly well-meaning advice began to create cracks in Emily's trust in her lover. She began to wonder if David was truly committed to her or if he had his own hidden intentions. As the tension between the three increased, John maintained his calm and collected demeanor. He knew he couldn't rush it, each step needed to be calculated and precise. Every day, he collected more information, more evidence to use at the right time. His plan for revenge was not just about retribution, but about emotionally destroying those who betrayed him, piece by piece. One night, Emily came home earlier than usual and found John sitting in her office, surrounded by documents. She tried to start a conversation, but he was distant, cold. John casually mentioned that he had heard rumors about David at work, hinting that he might be involved in suspicious activity. Emily tried to hide her concern, but John realized the impact of her words. He was getting exactly what he wanted, making Emily doubt David. At the same time, John began dropping subtle hints that he himself might be involved with another woman. Small details, such as messages on her cell phone and changes in her routine, made Emily question her husband's fidelity. The uncertainty began to erode her trust, not only in David, but also in John. The atmosphere in the apartment became increasingly charged, and Emily found herself trapped in a web of lies and suspicion. Meanwhile, John continued to get closer to David. He invited him to meetings and lunches, creating a false sense of camaraderie. During these meetings, John gathered more information about David's vulnerabilities, preparing himself for the moment to deliver the final blow. He knew that in order to completely destroy their relationship, he needed to create a scenario where trust was irreparably broken. In one of these meetings, John casually mentioned that he had heard rumors about a possible embezzlement of money in the company. David became visibly nervous, trying to hide his concern. John took the moment to insinuate that someone close to him could be involved, planting the seed of doubt. David began to suspect that Emily might be connected to the problems at work, and the tension between them grew even more. Emily, in turn, began to realize that she was being manipulated, but she couldn't identify exactly how. Distrust and paranoia began to affect her behavior, and she found herself increasingly isolated. John watched every movement, every reaction, waiting for the right moment to deliver the final blow. The tension reached its peak at a charity party organized by Emily. The event was supposed to be a night of celebration, but John had other plans. He used the opportunity to throw more doubt and innuendo at both Emily and David. At an opportune moment, John blurted out a conversation he had overheard about David and another woman. Emily, already fragile, publicly confronted David, creating a scene that caught the attention of everyone present. David, taken by surprise, tried to defend himself, but John's words had already caused irreparable damage. The trust between Emily and David was destroyed, and the party ended in disaster. John watched everything with cold satisfaction, knowing that his plan was unfolding perfectly. He had managed to plant the seeds of doubt and distrust, preparing the ground for the final revelation. John's plan was almost complete, and he knew the moment of final revenge was near. Every move, every word, every action had been carefully calculated to bring Emily and David to the brink of collapse. Now he just needed to deliver the coup de grace, revealing the secret that would destroy their lives forever. The fall of the traitors was about to begin, and John was ready to watch their revenge unfold. The night was cold and gloomy in New York, the city lights cast unsettling shadows across the streets. John walked slowly to the apartment, the weight of the last few weeks weighing on his shoulders. He knew the moment of revelation was near, and every detail had been meticulously planned. The revenge he so desired was about to be realized. Emily was sitting in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand. The tension was palpable in the air, suspicion and paranoia gnawed at his core. David had tried to get in touch several times, but she ignored every call. The doubts planted by John had germinated and now blossomed into an overwhelming distrust. John entered the apartment, keeping his expression calm. He knew that the final battle would begin there, in that room. He approached Emily, who looked at him with a mixture of fear and suspicion. "We need to talk," John said, his voice calm but firm. Emily nodded, placing the wine glass on the table. There was something in John's tone that made her realize this conversation would be different from the others. She straightened up on the couch, preparing herself for what came next. "I know about you and David," John began, watching her every reaction. "I know everything, Emily." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Her body tensed, and she tried to hide the surprise and fear she felt. "John, I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice shaking. John smiled, a cold, calculated smile. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and threw it on the table. Inside were photos, messages and all the evidence he had collected over the weeks. "There's no point in denying it, Emily. I have all the proof," he said, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "But that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is what I found out about David." Emily took the envelope with shaking hands and began leafing through the evidence. Tears began to stream down her face as she took in the magnitude of what she had done. But John's words about David left her confused and even more scared. "What did you discover?" she asked, her voice breaking. John moved closer, his presence becoming even more intimidating. "David never cared about you, Emily. He was using you the whole time." John paused, letting the words sink in. "He is part of a scheme to embezzle money from my company. You were both pawns in a much bigger game." Emily's eyes widened, unable to process the information. Everything she thought to be true was now crumbling before her eyes. "That's a lie!" she screamed, in a despair that mixed anger and confusion. John, remaining calm, picked up another envelope. This time, there were financial documents, bank transfers and communications linking David to fraudulent activity. "Here's the proof, Emily." He handed her the documents. "David approached you because he knew he could manipulate you, use you to get what he wanted. And you fell into the trap." Emily collapsed onto the couch, unable to stop herself from crying. David's betrayal was even more painful than the guilt of betraying John. She felt completely destroyed. "How could I be so stupid?" she murmured, between sobs. John looked at her with a mix of compassion and coldness. He had waited for this moment, but he couldn't help but feel a certain regret for the woman he had once loved. "You weren't stupid, Emily. You were manipulated. But now it's too late for regrets." John got up and started walking around the room. "You need to understand that actions have consequences. And now, we will all pay for it." Emily, still in shock, tried to compose herself. She knew she needed to confront David, but she also knew it wouldn't solve anything. The damage was done, and there was no turning back. John, on the other hand, felt that his revenge was not yet complete. He needed to make sure David paid for everything he had done. He picked up the phone and called David, arranging a meeting at the office. It was time for the final confrontation. The next day, John arrived at the office early, setting the stage for the confrontation. He knew David would come, confident that he was still in control of the situation. But John had other plans. David entered the office with an air of superiority, but his expression changed when he saw John sitting behind the desk, with a serious expression. "John, to what do I owe the honor?" David asked, trying to maintain his composure. John stood up slowly, watching David's every move. He took the envelope with all the evidence and threw it on the table. "You know very well, David. The game is over," John said, with menacing calm. David looked at the documents, his face losing color. He tried to hide his panic, but he knew he was trapped. "John, I can explain," David began, but was interrupted by John. "I don't need your explanations, David. I need the truth." John walked around the table and approached him. "You used my wife, stole from my company and tried to destroy me. But now it's your turn to face the consequences." David tried to step back, but John grabbed his arm, forcing him to look into his eyes. "You will confess everything, David. He's going to tell you how he manipulated Emily, how he embezzled money from my company and who else was involved." John's voice was cold and implacable. David knew there was no way out. The pressure increased, and he began to speak, revealing every detail of the scheme. He told how he had gotten close to Emily, how he used her to access privileged information and how he diverted large sums of money to offshore accounts. John recorded the entire confession, every word being recorded as evidence. When David finished, John let go of his arm and stepped back, letting him realize the extent of his defeat. "You will pay for this, David. And I will ensure that you and all your accomplices are brought to justice." John spoke with fierce determination. David fell to his knees, begging for mercy, but John remained impassive. He knew that his revenge was almost complete, and there was no room for mercy. John handed over the recordings and documents to the authorities, launching an investigation that would dismantle the entire network of corruption. David was arrested, and news of the financial scandal spread quickly, tarnishing his reputation and destroying his professional life. Emily, for her part, was devastated. The truth about David and the extent of his betrayal left her emotionally devastated. John, despite everything, offered her support, but made it clear that their marriage had come to an end. John's revenge was complete, and he felt a strange sense of relief. The pain of betrayal had been replaced by a sense of justice, and he knew that despite everything, he had managed to keep his integrity intact. With David imprisoned and Emily facing the consequences of her actions, John prepared to start his life over. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to move forward, leaving the shadows of the past behind. The weeks that followed the confrontation were a whirlwind of events. David's arrest and investigation into the embezzlement scheme dominated the news, and the lives of everyone involved were thrown into absolute chaos. John, however, stood firm, focused on ensuring justice was served. Emily was a specter of what she had been. David's betrayal and the destruction of her marriage to John have left her adrift. She isolated herself, avoiding social contact and spending her days in a daze. Guilt and regret consumed her, and she didn't know how to move forward. John, on the other hand, threw himself into work, using his determination to rebuild his company and clear his name from the shadows of scandal. He knew he couldn't let other people's mistakes destroy everything he had built. He gathered his most loyal team and began implementing measures to regain the trust of investors and customers. However, the void left by Emily was still present. Although he knew that revenge was necessary, the absence of the woman he once loved was a wound that would take time to heal. John put in long hours at the office, trying to fill the void with work and goals. One night, while reviewing documents in the office, John received an unexpected visitor. Emily entered, her appearance haggard and her eyes marked by constant crying. She seemed hesitant but determined to speak. "John, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I need to talk to you," Emily said, her voice shaking. John looked up, surprised by the visitor. He gestured for her to sit down, without saying a word. "I just wanted to apologize. I know I can't change what I did, but I want you to know that I deeply regret it." Emily spoke sincerely, tears streaming down her face. John watched her for a moment, his emotions conflicting. He knew her regret was genuine, but he also knew the wounds were deep. "Emily, I understand your regret, but you need to understand that our lives have changed forever." John's voice was firm, but there was no longer anger, just a deep tiredness. Emily nodded, wiping away her tears. She knew that reconciliation was impossible, but she needed to close that chapter of her life with dignity. "I'm leaving town, John. I need a new start, away from all this. I just wanted to let you know that I'm truly sorry." She stood up, looking at him one last time before turning to leave. John was silent, watching her leave. There was a feeling of relief, but also sadness. He knew they both needed to move on, each in their own way. As Emily left the office, John felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. Her presence would always be a painful memory, but now he could begin to heal the wounds and build a new life. In the following days, John intensified his efforts to rebuild the company. The investigations continued, revealing more details about the corruption scheme and leading to the arrest of other accomplices. The company began to recover, and investor confidence gradually returned. John began participating in social and professional events again, expanding his network and seeking new opportunities. At one of these events, he met Laura, a brilliant and determined lawyer who worked at the firm responsible for investigating the scandal. They met several times at meetings and events, and a genuine friendship began to form. Laura was different from Emily. She was strong, independent and shared John's determination. Little by little, a deeper connection began to develop between them. John found himself smiling again, feeling a glimmer of happiness he thought he had lost forever. Meanwhile, Emily went on her way. She left New York and moved to a small coastal town, where she began working at an art gallery. The healing process was slow, but she was determined to rebuild her life, away from the shadows of the past. John and Laura continued to meet, and the friendship blossomed into something more. Both carried scars from past experiences, but found solace and strength in each other. Laura's presence brought a new perspective to John's life, and he began to envision a different future, where the pain of betrayal finally began to fade. Life went on, and John knew that although the path had been difficult, he had found a new purpose. Revenge had brought justice, but it had also taught valuable lessons about trust, strength, and resilience. Now, he was ready to embrace the future, with Laura by his side and a renewed determination to face any challenge that came his way. Time passed and life continued its course, but the scars left by past events remained, each one representing a battle fought and won. John and Laura have built a solid relationship based on trust and mutual respect. John's company has fully recovered, returning to being one of the most respected in the industry. Happiness finally seemed within reach. But fate still had one last twist in store. One autumn afternoon, as John and Laura were preparing for a trip, John received an unexpected call. It was from the investigator he had hired months ago. There was new information about David's scheme that needed to be discussed in person. John went to the appointed meeting, only to discover a truth that would shake his foundations. David, even in prison, still had allies operating in the shadows. One of them had tried to restart the corruption scheme, this time directly targeting Laura. The goal was to use Laura to access confidential information and destroy John once and for all. John felt the anger and frustration rising again. David's shadow still loomed over their lives, threatening everything he had rebuilt. Determined to protect Laura and put an end to this threat once and for all, John hatched a plan to expose David's allies and ensure they were brought to justice. Meanwhile, Emily, in her new life in the small coastal town, began to realize that the peace she sought would not be easy to achieve. She was still tormented by the past, and the memories of her betrayal and the subsequent chaos wouldn't leave her alone. He then decided to face his demons, returning to New York to try to correct some of his mistakes. Emily sought out John, willing to help him combat the remnants of David's scheme. She had valuable information that could help dismantle the corruption network once and for all. John, reluctant but aware of the importance of what she knew, accepted Emily's help. Together, with Laura by their side, they began working to expose the truth. The investigations led to a series of arrests and shocking revelations about the extent of corruption that had infiltrated various spheres of society. David's name was finally associated with a larger-scale criminal organization, and justice began to be served. However, the fight to eradicate evil came at a high price. During an operation to capture one of David's main accomplices, Laura was seriously injured. John, desperate, stayed by her side in the hospital, his heart squeezed by the fear of losing her. The scene brought back all the emotions he thought he had overcome, but it also strengthened his resolve. Laura survived, but the incident left deep scars. John, seeing her in that state, realized that the cycle of revenge and pain needed to be broken. He swore an oath to himself to protect Laura and ensure she was never the target of violence again. Emily, in turn, realized that her search for redemption was an ongoing journey. She decided to leave New York again, this time to work on humanitarian projects abroad. Before leaving, she had one last conversation with John, where they both finally said goodbye to the ghosts of the past. "I'm sorry about everything, John," Emily said, with tears in her eyes. "I hope one day you can forgive me." "I've already forgiven you, Emily," replied John, with a sad smile. "Take care of yourself and find your peace." Emily left, leaving John and Laura to rebuild their lives without the shadows of the past. They moved to a quiet house in the countryside, away from the hustle and bustle of the city and painful memories. There, they began a new life, focused on love, trust and the future. The impact of David's scandal reverberated for a long time, but John knew he had done the right thing. He learned that revenge may bring a temporary sense of justice, but true peace comes from moving forward and rebuilding based on love and integrity. And so, in the silence of the new house, with Laura by his side, John finally found the tranquility he was looking for. The past had been left behind, and the future was a blank canvas, ready to be filled with new dreams and hopes.